Please be seated. The court is back in session, and the floor is now handed over to the prosecution to continue questioning the witness.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Witness, let me ask you just a further point of information on what you were saying before we broke, just to be absolutely sure about this. When you said that one of the production units was under Zone 304 and around 1977 it was transferred over to the Foreign Ministry, were you talking about Bang Trabai or Chen Chanes?
I would like to make a correction. I was focusing on Trang Chumres before we broke. Now I would like to correct that to Bang Trabai. I was not in charge of Bang Trabai when Bang was not there. Bang Eng Sari asked me to help taking in charge temporarily. It lasted no longer than 2 weeks. I went there to help organize things, that is to prepare when the Vietnamese came in. I did not stay there for long.
Thank you. Well, we can come back to Chang Chanre and Bang Trabai production units at a later stage, probably tomorrow. You told us just now that internal business of the ministry was under your responsibility. You talked about logistics. You talked about guest houses, cooking, production units. And you also said that you were in charge of psychological questions. Now, I'm not really quite sure what these words mean in this particular context, and so we'd like to hear what you really meant when you talked about these psychological questions.
Response. The section that I was responsible for did not contain any factories. This is point number one. There was no factory. As for the psychological issues, we did whatever it takes for, first of all, our people to live with morals, to be nationalist, to defend the nation and to build the nation. And as for the morals, just like what I said earlier, it refers to the 12 morals. In addition to this, we also studied a number of documents concerning building clean spirits.
So could one summarize by just talking about political indoctrination of the members of the Foreign Ministry offices? You were in charge of that.
Response. I was not essentially responsible for that, but because there was a lack of human resource, I was put in place that is to continue the operation of the place. If you talk about the structure of the ministry, the structure itself was not complete yet.
Est-ce que vous aviez une responsabilité aussi?
Were you also entrusted with the task of giving the cadres ideological training?
I do not understand the word ideology. I think I only train psychological issues about national issues. So what I implemented was to help our people to protect and build the nation.
Est-ce que vous aviez des responsabilités également?
Did you also have duties in respect of intellectuals? Can you tell us that?
Pardon, je voudrais préciser, pas les intellectuels du ministère.
Excuse me, I don't mean the intellectuals in the ministry. I mean other intellectuals outside the ministry.
I was not responsible for any intellectuals outside the ministry. I did not have any full responsibility for the intellectuals inside the ministry either. It was Mr. Evidentiary who was responsible for that.
Mr. President, I would like to refer to D91/14 once again. It's also E3/91. And in particular to the French ERN 00503933, in English 00223592, and in Khmer 0020409526. And I believe the witness already has the document. And it's around page 4 or 5.
The President's court officer is instructed to assist the witness so that he can locate the portion being questioned about.
Alors pour trouver le passage, là, c'est une réponse.
It's an answer, in fact, that's below a question that talks about the liberation of Phnom Penh on the 17th of April 1975, and the question is, at what stage did you go and work in the foreign ministry? What were your duties? What was the name of the minister at the time? And in the middle of the paragraph, you say that Mr. Evidentiary was in charge of the foreign ministry and I was the Secretary General. I was responsible for the supervision of the cadres and the staff in the ministry, and at that particular time I had to look after 1,000 children who were the children of revolutionary cadres, and they all required technical training together. I also had responsibility for intellectuals who had come back from France and from the United States. And I was also responsible for other intellectuals inside the country. You say a few more words in that response, but I won't read the entire document. So, turning now to this responsibility for intellectuals coming back in from abroad or others who are already in the country, can you confirm what you stated there, or would you like to make things a little clearer?
I would like to add concerning the portions that read, I supervised intellectuals who had returned from France and the United States and some others inside the country. I would like to say that the scope of the work was confined to only that within the ministry. And that work itself was concerning with facilitating or helping people not to be in conflicts concerning their livelihood. That is my addition. And I stand by the rest of my statements.
Merci.
In the same answer, you talked about being in charge of the cadres and the personnel. Did you deal with recruiting and management of personnel, or rather the disciplinary side?
Concerning the staff at the ministry, as I said, we had two sections. One dealt with the intellectuals and another dealt with the workers, the peasants. The one who had the highest responsibility was Ieng Sari. I was only a coordinator. I was coordinating between the peasants and the intellectuals so that they would not be in conflict.
In the ministry, who was responsible for organizing visits by foreign delegations? Was that part of your section's work, or did it fall to the intellectuals?
It was the intellectual section.
What about security?
I was also part of the security. I was part of it.
Quelle était la fonction principale de votre adjoint?
Mr. Chim, your deputy, had what particular responsibilities?
The main responsibilities of GM included the security, plantations, and cleaning. Cleaning houses for the guests.
Just now, you told us that your role was as a coordinator, and Yang Sari was, in reality, the real boss. Does that mean that he had complete responsibility for everything done in the foreign ministry?
បាទអញ្ចឹងមែន
Yes, it is correct.
So, when you were working, when, as Secretary General of the Ministry, you fulfilled your duties, it was always in full respect of the hierarchy, with permission from above from Yang Sari. Is that correct?
បាទមានការអនុញ្ញាតពី
Yes, we had to have permissions from Mr. Ieng Sari. However, if Mr. Pang was present there,
អាចប្រាប់លោកអៀងសេរីក៏បានដែរ
Mr. Pang could decide without informing Mr. Ieng Sari.
Quelle était la fonction de M. Pang?
What was Mr. Pang's duty?
តាមខ្ញុំដឹងពីព្រោះ
As far as I know,
ការថាឋានៈអីទេ
because we had no announcements concerning the rank of Mr. Pang, he was probably
ធានមន្ទីរ807
Chief of Office 870.
Just now you confirmed a statement in which you said that upon the death of Survazi alias Thun, he became head of Office 870. Now you're saying Pang was. What is the explanation for this?
ខ្ញុំមិនអាចដឹងច្បាស់លាស់ដែរ
I could not know for sure
ចេញចូលខ្ញុំក៏ថាអាច
because I saw them
ហើយលោកឌឿនហ្នឹង
visiting the place, so I assumed that he was the chief of the office. I was not even sure when it comes to Duen,
មិនដែលប្រកាសថា
because there were no announcements concerning the appointments of these two individuals and their duties.
Toujours dans l'exercice.
Carrying on the question of the jobs you did within the ministry, according to the principles that prevailed at the time, who were you supposed to report to for all of the activities that were undertaken in your office and by your general secretariat?
គឺខ្ញុំរាយការណ៍ទៅ
I reported to Mr. Ieng Sari.
Est-ce qu'en matière de sécurité, vous faisiez également rapport à...
Did you also report to Yang Sari on security, or did you report to Pang?
ផ្នែកសន្តិសុខក៏រាយការណ៍ទៅលោកអៀង
As for security, I also reported that to Mr. Ieng Sari.
Do you know if Pang met with Yang Sari in the ministry?
បាទអត់យល់សំណួរបាទ
I do not understand the question.
Tout à l'heure, vous avez parlé du fait
Well, just now you were talking about the fact that Pang had a certain amount of authority in the ministry. At the same time, he wasn't actually a part of it. But the normal procedure when you go to a ministry in which you had business to do would be presumably to meet the head of the ministry. In other words, did Pang sit down and talk with Yang Sari?
បាទនីតិវិធីកាលសម័យនោះ
The procedure at that time was that Pang was probably in charge of the security at office 870. Therefore, Pang had the authority
មកតាក់ទងអ្វីនៅក្រសួង
to come and communicate with the ministry,
សួងការបរទេសណាបាទ
the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That's what I'm talking about.
Yes, but my question was to know if Pang had a working relationship with Yang Sari when he came to the ministry. Obviously, when Yang Sari was there and not abroad.
ពេលយ៉ាងសេរីទៅ
When
បានប៉ងមក
Ieng Sari went outside, Pang came. Pang did not come when Ieng Sari was present at the ministry.
Je vais en revenir maintenant au point du rapport
Coming back to the question of reports that you submitted to Yang Sari, were they written reports or did you report to him orally at meetings you held with him?
ជាធម្មតារាយការណ៍
Usually, it was done orally.
Est-ce que vous aviez souvent des réunions
Did you often have meetings with Yang Sari during the whole period where you were Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
បាទប្រជុំញឹកញាប់
We had frequent meetings.
Pouvez-vous nous dire si vous le rencontriez
Are you able to tell us if you met him every day, a couple of times a week, or maybe twice a month?
បាទផ្ទះនៅជាប់នឹងក្រសួងការបរទេស
The house was close to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so it was daily.
ពេលណាគាត់មកធ្វើមកក្រសួងការបរទេស
When he came to work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I met him. I met him every day.
Et est-ce que c'était toujours des réunions à deux
Were there always only the two of you at the meetings, or were they ministerial committee meetings? And if so, how regularly did the latter take place?
តែពីរនាក់ក៏បានជួបគ្នា
We had the meeting of both of us. We also had meetings that comprised of more than two of us.
lors des réunions avec d'autres personnes, par exemple,
And where there were more than two of you, for example, the office heads, by which I mean Munti in Khmer, who did the reports at the end of those meetings?
មន្ទីរប្រធានមន្ទីរផ្នែកខាង
The directors of office
បង្កបង្កើនផលផ្នែកខាងគេថាផ្នែកខាងកសិករខ្ញុំនិយាយ
of plantations, or what I could say is the peasants. It was me who reported it,
ហើយផ្នែកខាងបញ្ញាជន
or
មានផ្នែក
it was Jim. Concerning the intellectuals,
ការងាររបស់បញ្ញា
somebody else would report that, because I was not aware of the intellectuals issues.
D'accord, vous n'étiez pas au courant de ces questions.
You weren't aware of the issues, but you were present at the meetings, and somebody had to produce the report. So who among the officials there actually did the report on the activities of the intellectuals within the ministry?
I saw the report from respective sections of the ministry. We have respective reporters. Some units, they have their own reporters. But as for me, I was not aware of the intellectuals.
Quel était le rôle joué par Ieng Sary lors de cette réunion?
And at these meetings, what role did Ieng Sary play? Did he take the floor, and what sort of things did he say?
I cannot remember all concerning particular work. Well, he talked about technicality of work that we had.
Did he give instructions, dispense advice, or set objectives for the ministry at these meetings?
If we talk about the word order, I don't think he ordered others.
Did he also use the meetings to share information with you about party positions or the standing committee's position on different issues? Did he keep you abreast of what the party was taking by way of decisions in certain areas?
I don't think he used to do that.
Est-ce que Ieng Sary présidait des réunions
Did Ieng Sary chair meetings that were devoted to self-examination inside the ministry?
Yes, he did.
Qu'est-ce que c'était ces réunions?
And
Pouvez-vous nous expliquer en quoi ça consistait?
how were they run, these meetings? What did they consist of? What did Ieng Sary do during these introspection, these self-examination meetings?
The self-criticism was to self-build oneself. That is to observe oneself to see whether one has done anything wrong and to consider that. Secondly, it was up to the collectivity or the collective group who would decide on that. And thirdly, it was Mr. Ieng Sary who would draw the conclusion concerning the advantages and disadvantages of that particular individual.
Est-ce que Ieng Sary était toujours présent
Question.
à ce type de réunion?
Was Ieng Sary always present at such meetings? Was he always the person who chaired those meetings?
Response: he was only present during the major meetings. For example, for the the yearly meeting or the 3-month meeting, and the monthly meeting was only held at each respective section.
ប្រជុំប្រចាំអាទិត្យក្រុមមួយមួយ
As for the weekly meetings, they were held for each group.
D'accord. Dans ces réunions d'introspection,
Very well. Question.
est-ce qu'on parlait
When Ieng Sari was present at self-criticism meetings, did they talk about enemies? Enemies within and enemies outside?
ជាធម្មតាគឺមាន
Response: in general, yes.
Pourquoi parlait-on des ennemis?
Question. Why did they talk about enemies? Were there any threats? Were there enemies within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Response: it is rather difficult for me to respond to your question.
ខ្ញុំសូមអត់ឆ្លើយ
I decline to respond to this question, as I do not really understand the depth of your question.
Je vais répéter ma question.
Let me rephrase my question.
Pourquoi devait-on parler des ennemis?
Why did they have to talk about enemies, since you did say that they talked about enemies in the self-criticism meetings? Why was it necessary to talk about enemies in the foreign ministry? Was it because there may have been enemies hiding in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
សំណួរនេះវាចូលទៅក្នុងទស្សនវិជ្ជា
The question is, I believe, related to the philosophy, and I cannot explain that to you. Let me make some conclusive remarks. Each individual, including myself,
គឺមានទស្សនៈខាងព្រំមួយ
has a
ទស្សនៈ
view on the
ទី3មានទស្សនៈខាងបិសាច
on the world view, and also the view related to hell, that is to another world, and also the view on the dark side. That is my philosophy.
Quels étaient, à votre avis, les buts de ces réunions d'introspection?
In your opinion, what were the aims of the self-examination meetings and the revolutionary self-criticism meetings?
ណែ
Are you asking about the intention or the purpose?
Oui, pourquoi était-il important
Question. Yes. Why was it important for those meetings to be organized? Why was it important for the party?
ក្នុងការប្រជុំទាំងអស់នេះដូចខ្ញុំបានជម្រាប
Response:
មិញអញ្ចឹង
the importance was that, as I stated earlier,
ខ្ញុំ
personally,
នៅពាក្យថាព្រំ
myself is attached to the philosophy of Brum. What does it mean? It means
តើអ្នកធ្វើផ្ទះ
whether the person
ព្រំឬទេ
who built a house also built with a Brum attached.
ធ្វើតាមដំបូលមានព្រះព្រំ
It means individuals so practiced or so behave based on the discipline or on the principle of Brum. For instance, when you refer to the criminal law,
បើអ្នកឯងធ្វើខុស
which states if you commit something wrong against the law or against the prum that is based on the philosophy, then you will be you commit an offense. And if you refer to the philosophy of prum, that is of those four substances, the earth, the air, the water, for instance, then you commit something wrong. This is just my understanding, my own philosophy. And for that reason, it is better to have a reflective, a revolutionary self-criticism.
សូមមានយោបល់បន្តិចទៀតណាបើមិនធ្វើអញ្ចឹងទេមិនឈ្នះទេ
If we do not adhere to such a principle of philosophy, we cannot control ourselves. And if we cannot control ourselves, how can we manage the country?
Est-ce qu'à ces réunions,
Question. During those meetings, could people be criticized in relation to the 12 moral principles you refer to? And did people also air any weaknesses they had?
Response, indeed, yes. If you were toward the side of the devil, then you would need to change yourself. If you do not change, then you will self-destruct yourself and also destroy the country.
et si quelqu'un se mettait
Question. And if someone sided with the devil, as you have said, but did not change, and during the self-criticism meetings held on several occasions, it was discovered that errors had been made, what were the consequences for that person if the said person persisted in making those mistakes?
Response. They hate to change. They hate to change gradually.
ដែលផលថា
It never appeared to happen that nobody ever admitted that they did not do anything wrong.
Est-ce qu'il y a des gens qui n'arrivent tout simplement pas
Question. Were there people who quite simply did not happen to change? Were there examples of people who did not abide by the disciplinary rules and who had to be shoved aside or punished at the foreign ministry?
មិនដែលដាក់វិន័យអីទេ
Response. There was no disciplinary action at the ministry.
ចង់ថាវិន័យយ៉ាងម៉េចលោក
However, could you please clarify what you refer to when you talk about the discipline? Are you referring to the punishment?
ឬមួយយកទៅសម្លាប់អី
Or that the person will be taken and killed? Could you make it that clear?
Oui, je parle effectivement.
Question. Indeed, I am referring to disciplinary measures. Did such measures exist? And secondly, if the person concerned persistently committed the errors, could that person lose his or her post, be transferred elsewhere, or arrested?
ក្នុងក្រសួងការបរទេស
Response. Within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there was no disciplinary measure of arrest. there was a transfer process. For instance, if somebody committed an offense in house number 1, then they would be transferred to house number 2. Or if they committed an offense in house number 2, they will be transferred to house number 3. That's how the process was organized.
Merci.
Thank you. Question. Whenever Ieng Sary, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, was on mission, who was in charge of the ministry in his absence?
President, Duty Council, you may proceed. Council, thank you, Mr. President. The question asked by the International Prosecutor actually was asked once to Ieng Sary, and now the question is intended for my client, which means that would possible to incriminate himself. President, Council, you are advised to discuss with your client first whether your client wishes to respond to that question. You can't take steps to explain to your client regarding the possible response to the question and whether he is willing to respond to that question. It is the decision of your clients to respond or not, and it is your role to discuss with your client regarding his decision. Council, I would like to seek your permission for time to consult with my client. President, yes, you may proceed. President, Council, you need to have your client speak. The witness. I would like the prosecutor to repeat his last question. President, thank you, witness. Witness, could you please listen to the question? And if you think the question would elicit your response that might incriminate yourself, then you need to pause and consult with your duty counsel. What is the legal implication of your response before you decide to proceed? Or whether you would decline to respond to that particular question, as your response may incriminate yourself. And it is not for the Duty Council to seek advice from the chamber or to restrain questions from being posed to you. And of course, this only occurs on a few occasions, or it might never occur for the entire proceeding. Prosecutor, could you repeat your last question so that the witness can hear and respond?
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, my question was as follows. When Ieng Sary was away on mission, who chaired meetings at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
កិច្ចប្រជុំនៅក្រសួងការបរទេស
Response. Regarding the meetings at the ministry, the meetings were held based on respective sections.
Mais pour les grandes réunions, est-ce qu'il y avait des grandes réunions?
Question, how about big meetings? Were there big meetings attended by all heads of offices, for instance?
មិនមានទេបាទ
Response. No, there was no such meetings.
Pourquoi n'y avait-il pas de ce type de réunion?
Question, why were such meetings not held? Did Ieng Sary have to return from his missions for such meetings to be organized?
កិច្ចប្រជុំមានប៉ុន្តែ
This meant
ប្រជុំតូចៗ
the meetings were held, but they were just smaller meetings based on the group or the teams.
Au cas où un grand problème, une grande question,
In the event where a major problem occurred, was the foreign ministry assisted by cadres from the standing committee
អត់មាន
when Ieng Sary wasn't present?
Response. No.
មានបញ្ហាអីធំៗ
And it seems that there had never been any major problems.
et est-il arrivé que Ieng Sary et vous-même
Question, did you and Ieng Sary happen to travel together? You already mentioned that he went to China and the UN General Assembly, and that both of you attended such meetings. Who headed the Ministry of Foreign Affairs then when he went on those two trips?
ខ្ញុំភ្លេចហើយបាទ
Response. I cannot recall. I forget about that.
est-ce que Monsieur le témoin
Question, witness, can you tell us who was in charge of the committee relating to the Friends of Democratic Kampuchea worldwide? Who was responsible for that committee?
ខ្ញុំអត់យល់សំណួរបាទ
Response. I do not understand your question.
Je voulais savoir s'il y avait
Question, I wish to know whether there was a committee in the foreign ministry that was in charge of improving relations with friendly countries and foreigners all over the world. And I would like to know who was in charge of that committee.
Je voudrais maintenant, puisqu'il reste 10 minutes, aborder...
Since I have 10 minutes left, I would like us to talk about a subject of importance. I mean, how people who are not intellectuals in the foreign ministry were treated. Can you first of all tell us what was approximately the proportion of the staff of the foreign ministry who were from the worker or peasant class in relation to the intellectuals?
Response. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs did not select their staff by itself. It was Mr. Pong who made that selection.
Est-ce qu'il y avait plus
Question.
de membres du personnel des affaires étrangères qui venaient des classes
Were there more staff members drawn from the worker or peasant class than the staff who were intellectuals working in the foreign ministry? Which was the bigger group?
Response. The bigger group was the peasants group.
Est-ce que l'on peut considérer que
Question. Can we take it that those peasants who were recruited by Pan were drawn from a class that was pure?
Response. Yes, that is correct.
Alors qu'est-ce que cela veut dire?
Question. What do you mean by this concept of pure biography? Can you explain that to us? Having a pure past or coming from a pure class. What does that mean under the democratic Cambodia regime?
Response. They were from the poor class.
Est-ce qu'il y avait des personnes
Question.
dont la classe ou la biographie
Were there persons whose class or biography was not clear-cut in the foreign ministry, or only people drawn from a pure class were recruited?
Response. It is difficult for me to respond. It seems rather confused. I decline to respond to this question.
Est-ce qu'il vous est difficile de répondre à la question?
Question. Is it that the question is too difficult for you to understand and answer, or you decline to answer that question?
Response. I find it difficult to respond, as I have stated already regarding the peasant class. The people from the peasants class was elected for me. Of course, from my point of view, they were already screened. So it is rather difficult for me to talk about this technical process. If they were selected from the lower level to provide service to my level, then of course I would accept it. This is just in layman's term. But if you refer to the technical process, to me it's rather difficult and confused.
Je voudrais tout de même vous
Question. Mr. President, I would like to refer the chamber to two answers which the witness gave in 2010, document E3346 D376. These are answers 21 and 70. With your permission, may I request that these documents be placed on the screen and that the witness be asked to read what he said at the time to investigators.
Voilà, alors. À la réponse 21, vous avez dit.
Well, in answer number 21, this is what you said. As I have already stated, in B1, people whose biography wasn't clear-cut were set aside, and subsequently, when investigations were conducted on them, they were sacked and sent elsewhere. And in answer number 70, I will repeat the question for purposes of clarity. There is a document, and this is a question, there's a document stipulating that there are enemies in the offices. If these enemies were recalcitrant, the ministry would send them to the security center in order for them to be brought under control. And the investigator asked you to say whether that was true, and you said that did not exist. And you said that in the ministry, people whose biography was clear-cut were recruited. In light of both answers, may I ask you to clarify your position, whether you stand by your statement? That is, whether your answer to answer 21 still stands, that is, those whose biographies were not clear-cut were set aside, and that if they persisted, they were sacked and sent elsewhere. Do you stand by your answers to those questions? And do you have any remarks to make in light of what I have just said?
Response: I still stand by my statement. However, I'd like to clarify one point. For instance, in relation to my elder-in-law, his name is Ra. Pong sent him to me temporarily. And whenever they wanted it, they took him out, and I did not know where he was sent to. President, the time is now appropriate for the adjournment. I thank you, the prosecutor and the witness. The proceeding for today comes to an adjournment, and we shall resume tomorrow commencing from 9 a.m. And as for Mr. Witness, we still need to hear your testimony due to the larger scope of the events and the many other questions related to you. We would invite you to return tomorrow to provide your testimony, and that you will be questioned by other parties. Of course, the questions will be different from today's questions. And duty counsel, you are also invited to accompany your client during his testimony tomorrow. Please make yourself available before 9 a.m. tomorrow. Court officer, could you coordinate with Visu to assist the witness for his transportation and assist him for his arrangement to be here tomorrow morning before 9 a.m. Security guards, you are instructed to take the 3 accused back to the detention facility and have them back here tomorrow morning before 9 a.m. The court is now adjourned.